Welcome to Deep Into Finance family. We appreciate you being here with us. Give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Share with your friends and family and stay up to date to our future videos. Inflation is a term used to describe the increase in the prices of goods and services over time. When inflation reaches an all-time high, it can have significant economic consequences for individuals, businesses, and governments. In this video, we will explore the causes and effects of all-time high inflation and discuss possible solutions to this economic problem. Causes of all-time high inflation. Inflation is typically caused by a combination of factors, including increased demand for goods and services, increased production costs, and an expansion of the money supply. When there is more demand for goods and services than there is supply, prices tend to rise. Similarly, when the cost of producing goods and services increases, prices tend to increase as well. Finally, when the money supply expands, there is more money available to spend, leading to higher prices. One of the most significant causes of all-time high inflation is a rapid increase in the money supply. This can happen for several reasons, including increased government spending, lower interest rates, or quantitative easing by central banks. When there is more money in circulation, people have more money to spend, which drives up demand for goods and services. As a result, businesses raise their prices to keep up with the increased demand. Another cause of all-time high inflation is a supply chain disruption. When there is a shortage of goods or services, their prices tend to increase. This can happen due to natural disasters, trade disputes, or other events that disrupt the flow of goods and services. Effects of all-time high inflation. All-time high inflation can have several negative effects on the economy. One of the most significant effects is that it reduces the purchasing power of consumers. When prices are high, people need more money to purchase the same amount of goods and services. This can lead to a decrease in consumer spending, which can have a ripple effect throughout the economy. All-time high inflation can also lead to increased unemployment. When prices rise, businesses may need to raise their prices to cover their increased costs. This can lead to a decrease in demand for their products or services, which can result in layoffs or reduced hours for employees. Additionally, inflation can make it more difficult for businesses to plan for the future, as they may not be able to predict their future costs or revenue. Finally, all-time high inflation can lead to a decrease in investment. When prices are high, investors may be less likely to invest in new businesses or industries, as they may not see a significant return on their investment. This can lead to a decrease in economic growth, as new businesses and industries are less likely to be created. Solutions to all-time high inflation. There are several solutions to all-time high inflation, including monetary policy, fiscal policy, and supply-side policies. Monetary policy involves adjusting interest rates and the money supply to manage inflation. When inflation is high, central banks can increase interest rates or reduce the money supply to reduce demand for goods and services. This can help to lower prices and bring inflation under control. Fiscal policy involves government spending and taxation. When inflation is high, governments can reduce spending or increase taxes to reduce demand for goods and services. This can help to lower prices and bring inflation under control. Additionally, governments can implement supply-side policies, such as deregulation or tax cuts, to encourage businesses to increase production and reduce costs. This can help to increase the supply of goods and services, which can help to lower prices and bring inflation under control. In conclusion, all-time high inflation can have significant economic consequences for individuals, businesses, and governments. It is typically caused by a combination of factors, including increased demand for goods and services, increased production costs, and an expansion of the money supply. When inflation is high, it reduces the purchasing power of consumers. unemployment, and can decrease investment in the economy. However, there are several solutions to all-time high inflation, including monetary policy, fiscal policy, and supply-side policies. By managing inflation through these policies, governments and central banks can help to stabilize the economy and mitigate the negative effects of all-time high inflation. It is important to note that inflation is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, some level of inflation is considered healthy for the economy, as it encourages businesses to invest and innovate, and provides an incentive for people to spend their money rather than hoarding it. However, when inflation becomes too high, it can have negative consequences. As such, it is important for governments and central banks to monitor inflation levels and take appropriate action to keep it under control. In recent years, many countries have experienced all-time high inflation, particularly in developing nations. Venezuela, for example, experienced hyperinflation in 2018, with prices increasing by over 800,000% in a single year. This had severe consequences for the Venezuelan economy, with widespread shortages of basic goods and services and an increase in poverty and unemployment. Other countries, such as Argentina and Zimbabwe, have also experienced high levels of inflation in recent years. In developed nations, all-time high inflation is less common, but it can still occur. In the United States, for example, inflation has been on the rise in recent months, driven in part by supply chain disruptions and increased demand as the economy recovers from the pandemic. While inflation levels are still relatively low by historical standards, some economists have raised concerns that inflation could become a problem if left unchecked. Overall, all-time high inflation is a complex economic issue with wide-ranging consequences. While there are several solutions to manage inflation, it requires a coordinated effort from governments, central banks, and businesses to ensure that inflation remains at a healthy level. By doing so, we can help to promote economic growth, stability, and prosperity for all. One way to manage all-time high inflation is through monetary policy. Central banks can adjust interest rates to influence the level of inflation in the economy. When inflation is high, central banks may raise interest rates to reduce demand for goods and services, which can help to bring down prices. Conversely, when inflation is low, central banks may lower interest rates to encourage spending and investment, which can help to stimulate economic growth. Another way to manage all-time high inflation is through fiscal policy. Governments can adjust spending and taxation to influence the level of inflation in the economy. When inflation is high, governments may reduce spending and raise taxes to reduce demand and bring down prices. Conversely, when inflation is low, governments may increase spending and cut taxes to stimulate economic growth. Finally, supply-side policies can also be used to manage all-time high inflation. These policies focus on increasing the supply of goods and services in the economy, which can help to bring down prices. This can be done through measures such as deregulation, reducing trade barriers, and promoting competition in industries. By increasing the supply of goods and services, businesses can compete on price, which can help to reduce inflation. While all of these policies can be effective in managing all-time high inflation, they also have their limitations. For example, monetary policy can be constrained by the zero lower bound, which is the point at which interest rates cannot be lowered any further. Fiscal policy can also be constrained by political considerations, such as the reluctance of policymakers to raise taxes or cut spending. In addition, there may be trade-offs between managing inflation and other policy objectives. For example, raising interest rates to combat inflation can also lead to higher unemployment, as businesses may cut back on hiring or investment. Similarly, reducing spending to combat inflation can also lead to reduced public services or higher taxes, which can be unpopular with voters. Despite these challenges, it is important for governments and central banks to take action to manage all-time high inflation, as the consequences of unchecked inflation can be severe. In addition to the economic consequences, high inflation can also lead to social and political unrest, as people become frustrated with rising prices and declining standards of living. In conclusion, all-time high inflation is a complex economic issue that requires a coordinated effort from governments, central banks, and businesses to manage effectively. While there are several policy tools available to manage inflation, there are also trade-offs and limitations to consider. By carefully balancing these factors, we can help to promote economic growth, stability, and prosperity for all.